Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is David Novak. So I decided to step out on a limb and do unbidden a tag, in this case, the mid-year book freakout tag 2023. I watched it yesterday at Supposedly Fun, and then today I saw Randy L. Ray, the literate Texan, had done it. And I thought I would just have a go with the questions. Some of these are non-applicable for me, but I will just take them one by one. Number one, the best book you've read so far. And this is a hard call. I've read some good books, but I decided to go with Untouchable by Mulkraj Anand. I also read Cooley by the same author. Untouchable was his first book, and it's a pared down story. There's nothing extraneous to it. Not that there's anything extraneous to Cooley, but Cooley is a broader canvas, and then there were some elements that, while I forgave him, so to speak, I felt they were minor defects, if you will. Who am I to judge? I know, but the directness of this book really enthralled me and captivated me. The best sequel, number two, the best sequel you've read so far. Well, I ended last year reading The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Gibbon. I'm not sure where I was at the break, but I was somewhere in the middle of volume 4. Of his 6 volumes. So early this year, the first book that I read that could possibly qualify as a sequel was Gibbon's volume 5 and 6, which in the Penguin edition, which I have but can't dig out, is volume 3. So it's the only thing that I've read that really could qualify as a sequel. Number 3. New release you haven't read but want to. I can't say about that. I don't keep up with the new releases. The only place I get my new releases from are the BookTubers that I watch, and I haven't seen any that jump out at me that I absolutely want to read that has as yet eluded me. So, number 4. The most anticipated release for the second half of the year. And again, that's none or non-applicable because I don't know what is going to be released. Number 5, the biggest disappointment. That would be The Price of Salt by Patricia Highsmith. And I think the reason for that was that I first heard about it in a glorious description by Ann Novella at her channel. And I think I went into the book with faulty expectations. I was expecting something different than what I encountered. I would say, were I to start anew with Patricia Highsmith, I mean, if I could go back and change things, I would select one of her more famous works. One of her masterpieces in the suspense genre for which she is best known. That said, it was not a wasted read. I did enjoy The Price of Salt. The biggest surprise would be a tie, I think. The first being Women and Economics by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. I went into that not expecting much and expecting I heard about it from a Facebooker that I follow, and he spoke of it in glowing terms, but also had a lot of negative criticisms of the book, and I was very surprised at how good the good parts struck me. So the biggest Surprise Part 2 is A Presentment of Englishry by the poet Liam Gillar. And I say that because I had read a previous book by, and I'm saying it the Spanish way, I believe he pronounces it Gillar, Liam Gillar. I read a previous book of his some years ago, and it was a decent book, but I did not expect to like this one as much as I did. And I think part of the reason for that is that Gillar is a medievalist, and the poems take you into a whole nother realm than what you expect contemporary poetry to do. I'll read you a poem of his. This is called The End of Romans Britain, early 5th century. We waited for the tax collectors on the appointed day, shuffling our seasonal excuses, banquet and bribes prepared to damp the threat behind the smile. Growing impatient, we watched the road, cautiously going about our lives, waiting for their trap to shut. Whisperings across the fields. The legions have gone over. They've left us on our own. My neighbor celebrated, caring only that bribes and banquet were not wasted. My wife and daughters demanded that we leave. They'd heard the stories. Atakoti eat the flesh of living victims, preferable to what Germani do with captive women. The silver that I'd stashed would buy us passage. We could start again. But I'd heard the Rhine was breached. Goths were marching towards Rome. When the world is coming to an end, there's nowhere safe to start again. Here on the bench seat in my garden, in the fragrant twilight, thinking, if right depends upon a sword, there is no future in refinement. Is life not worth the loss of leisure, my hoarded silver better spent on foederati? My daughters mated with their stinking leaders. So, on the poetics front, I wouldn't call it a perfect book. Some of the poems really struck me as being reminiscent of T.S. Eliot. After T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland came out, people found themselves unable to escape echoes of his verse in their own writing, and some of them became livid with rage against Eliot. I don't think that it's that bad with Gillar's book. It's more just an occasional echo here and there. And as I say, the theme of the book was just so strikingly original, at least to me, that it was a great surprise. Number 7, favorite new author, debut or new to you? Well, in this case, I decided to go with Morgan Talty, whose book, The Night of the Living Res, was the last book that I finished. And I go with him mainly because he's a new voice. He is the only living author who is a new author to me that I read in the course of the past 6 months. I had read Anthony Everett before, and I had read Liam Gillar before. So, and there was another book that I skimmed, but that doesn't count anyhow because I really skimmed it instead of reading it. So I went with Talty. Newest fictional crush, none. The newest favorite character, and that's another tough one. I don't, as with the crushes, I don't tend to categorize or rank the characters in fictional works that way. I don't even honestly tend to see them as living people. I don't invest them with the presentment of reality, if you will. But there was an exception to that, and that was the first book that I read this year, which was The Conjure Woman by Charles Chestnut. Now, I didn't read it in a standalone edition. I have it in this Library of America edition with a lot of other works. It's the only thing that I've read by Chestnut. And I should tell you that the way the stories are structured, there is a man and woman, husband and wife, who have moved to the south for some reason or other from the north. Presumably they are a white couple. And through the course of their day, in whatever story it is, something occurs which raises questions, let's say. And then the next thing that happens is they encounter, I think his name is Julian or Julius, who is a ex-plantation hand, ex-slave. All these stories occur in the period after the end of the Civil War and after all the slaves have been freed. And then he recounts a story in dialect form that somehow makes everything come together, all the unresolved questions that the narrator had, whatever their situation was. And it's usually a good yarn. But the character of the narrator is so subdued, reserved, and comical, yet perceptive to irony, that I really liked his character. Now, I believe these were individual stories published in places like the Atlantic Monthly and elsewhere, and the book was rushed out. And I believe he followed it up with other stories by the same character, which are in my Library of America edition, but I have not read those as yet. I suspect they will not be his best work, and I may, instead of reading them, if I pick up the book again, read one of his novels next. So, number 10, the book that made you cry, or the saddest book you have read. Well, there wasn't any, but probably the book that made me feel the most, that gave me the greatest rush of emotion at more than one point in the narrative, was The Night of the Living Rez. A book that made you happy, well, that I'm going to go with, that was number 11. I'm going to go with The First Crusade, the book by Stephen Runciman that I am on now. I've only gone slightly more than 100 pages of it. It's, I think, 250 pages tops. And I am loving the book so far, more, I think, than I have loved any book that I've read this year. It's history, but it's not... You know, Gibbon was sort of wrenchingly hard in passages because I was in Gibbon completely blind, not knowing anything. And there was just a plethora on every page of just incomprehensible names and places. And Runciman, well, he has the advantage that I am coming to him after having read Gibbon, and Gibbon touches on some of these same things. But his narrative is also so clear. I probably only get a little bit out of it, but I've already got a real sense of these crusaders, these bands of men out on their excursion, and it's really helping me to fill some huge gaps. I find now that I'm older and starting to read more, that I find what I am reading more often now consolidates things that I know or fills in gaps that I have long been aware of. And for me, the Crusades have been something I've heard about. They've been a word, but I never really had a sense, almost a cinematic sense of the movement. And so far, that is what Runciman is providing. So I'm quite enjoying that. Number 12, favorite book-to-film adaptation you saw this year? There has been none. 13, favorite review you've written this year, or BookTube version, favorite video you have done so far in this year? And those are none, or none to both of those. 14, the most beautiful book you've bought so far this year or received. And that, I would say, is The History of the Crusades. And that's because I got it in a folio edition. Here's the complete set. And I did a video opening up one of them and showing the viewer what the insides were like a little bit, but the complete package is just lovely. I was lucky that when I was shopping around for the books, it turns out that to get the Penguin editions, which were really what I wanted, to buy each of those separately would have cost about the same as what one vendor was offering the Folio Society edition in a slipcase for. So I went with the Folio slipcased version, and it's been a joy so far. And 15, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? And I will say simply the rest of the Crusade volumes. So that is the completion of the tag, numbers 1 through 15, and you are supposed to tag somebody. So I will tag Brian M.R. Because he did me the pleasure of tagging me a couple of weeks ago, and I thought that it would only be fair to reciprocate. That has been my reading year. I look forward to see more BookTubers putting out their videos, and I expect with the quantities of books that some of my fellow BookTubers are capable of reading, of packing into a half-year period, that there will be some interesting revelations to come. So thank you for stopping by.